Welcome to today's Explainer. Los Angeles is a city that literally never stops. Millions of people are constantly coming and going, crossing paths every single day. But back in September 2025, investigators stumbled onto something that brought all that motion to a screeching halt for one family. What started as a missing person case suddenly evolved into one of the most shocking, heavily scrutinized investigations in the whole country. So let's dive into the timeline and figure out how a single abandoned vehicle unlocked a mystery that had been haunting Southern California for well over a year. Our story actually kicks off in your standard run-of-the-mill Los Angeles tow yard in September 2025. Picture it. Amidst rows and rows of dusty, impounded cars, there's a Tesla. And it had just been sitting there, unclaimed, pretty much completely ignored for weeks. But eventually, someone at the yard noticed a really strong, undeniable odor coming from the car. So they call the authorities. And when investigators finally pry open the front trunk of that Tesla, they made a discovery that changed absolutely everything. Inside, they found human remains. When the LA County medical examiners stepped in, the identification they made was just devastating. The remains belonged to Celeste Rivas Hernandez, a teenager from Southern California. And what makes this so incredibly heavy is that she was only 13 years old when she was first reported missing. 13. It's an immediate, chilling reality that just forces us to ask, how on earth did a missing 13-year-old girl end up locked inside the front trunk of an impounded car? And maybe the even bigger question, who knew she was in there the whole time? To even begin answering those questions, investigators couldn't just stare at the tow yard. They had to look backward. Which brings us to part 1, the missing timeline, tracking the void. When you map out the timeline of this investigation, the sheer scale of the gap is honestly agonizing. Celeste went missing back in April 2024. For months, bleeding into over a year, her disappearance was a total blank. It wasn't until September 8th, 2025, that her remains were finally found in that Tesla. Think about that enormous gap. That meant detectives were forced to look way beyond the moment the car was found. They had to somehow piece together a massive year-and-a-half void to trace her final steps. And as we're going to see, by November 2025, they weren't just fighting for evidence, they were fighting a massive battle against public perception. Now, this case blew up nationally almost overnight, and it was entirely because of who that vehicle was connected to. The Tesla was linked to David Anthony Burke, who you might know better by his stage name D4VD. He's this rising, wildly successful musician. His song Romantic Homicide went completely viral, and he had built up a massive online fan base, even dropping his debut album right there in 2025. So suddenly, his name is splashed across headlines for something that has absolutely nothing to do with music. But we need to make something crystal clear right here. At the time of the discovery, police did not accuse him of causing her death. The investigation was literally just getting started. And that brings us to a major hurdle in modern investigations, covered in part 2, Fact versus Online Fiction, the Digital Investigation. You know how it is with true crime these days. A case like this almost instantly spawns two completely different realities running side by side. On one hand, you've got the official LAPD investigation. It's cautious, it's methodical police work, it's slow, relying on evidence and verified facts. But on the other side, the digital space. Social media speculation was moving at warp speed. We're talking old photos, unverified claims, and wild theories being shared by millions of people in a matter of seconds. People online were pointing fingers and locking in their conclusions way, way before any actual evidence was on the table. Well, the rumor mill got so incredibly out of control that the LAPD actually had to step in and hit the bricks. In November 2025, they put out official statements to debunk some horrific claims. They had to publicly confirm that no, the victim was not frozen, and no, she was not decapitated. Furthermore, they clarified that her cause and manner of death were still officially undetermined. They literally had to warn the public that all this dangerous misinformation was actively interfering with their ability to find out what actually happened. It all comes down to this really crucial legal principle, suspicion versus proof. Just because someone's remains are found inside a vehicle connected to a specific person, that fact does not, on its own, legally establish who caused the death, right? People can be investigated, they can be questioned without being legally proven guilty of a crime. An investigation is not a conviction. And all those wild assumptions on social media, they simply cannot replace court-ready evidence. Which leads us perfectly into the monumental task detectives actually face when they step away from the internet and step into the lab. Here is part 3, Unanswered Questions, Building a Real Case. Let's walk through what it actually takes to build a court-ready case. It's like a giant puzzle. Step 1 is forensic testing, which is absolutely vital to figure out exactly how and when she died. Step 2, intense witness interviews, trying to trace wherever she went after April 2024. Then there's Step 3, analyzing mountains of digital and vehicle records to understand exactly when and how that Tesla was being used. And finally, Step 4, combing through endless surveillance footage to lock down a concrete timeline. The sheer volume of work it takes to solve a mystery like this outside the public eye is staggering. The real evidence isn't dropping in a social media feed, it's locked inside forensics labs. Even by the end of 2025, despite all of that grueling work, detectives were still staring at a mountain of unknowns. Just look at these major questions. What actually happened to Celeste immediately after she disappeared in 2024? Exactly when and how did she die? How long were her remains just sitting inside that specific Tesla before someone at the tow yard finally noticed? And critically, who knew about the car and what was hidden inside it? The public simply didn't have these answers, which is exactly why this became one of the most unsettling, heavily watched cases in the entire country. While it's so easy to get swept up in the mechanics of the investigation and the viral frenzy, we have to ground ourselves. That brings us to part 4, beyond the headlines, the human toll. It's so important to remember that behind every flashy headline, behind every true crime theory floating around online, there is a real family. For Celeste's family, the discovery in that tow yard ended one terrible kind of uncertainty, that agonizing year of not knowing where she was. But tragically, it just replaced it with a whole new nightmare. We really have to remember that Celeste Rivas Fernandez was a daughter. She was a family member. She was just a 13-year-old girl whose life was cut incredibly short, under deeply, deeply troubling circumstances. She isn't just some mystery for us to consume. She was a human being. As the search for answers slowly continues through the legal system, we really need to hold on to this fundamental truth. An investigation is not the same as a conviction. The truth, in a complex case like this, takes months, sometimes even years, to establish the right way. Social media might be screaming for instant answers, but justice demands patience, deep scrutiny, and undeniable facts. Which leaves us with a final thought for today's explainer. As we watch this case, and honestly others just like it continue to unfold, it really challenges how we consume these stories. Until every single fact is proven in a court of law, can we remember the profound difference between suspicion and proof? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and just remember, sometimes the biggest mystery isn't what we think happened, but what the evidence can actually prove.